But the first question that I actually wanted to ask is in this Skillshare is what are the ingredients of a good story? When you think about something that's a good story, is there a particular thing that stands out to you that sets a good story apart from a boring one? And if you can think of something, just chuck it in the chat. Something I can connect with. Yep, main. Nice. One of the ones that I thought of when I was thinking about this was like tangibility, like being able to imagine what the story is telling you, and whether people do that through the different senses, like sight, touch, sound, things like that. Kia ora. Authenticity. Yes, that's such a good one. Yeah. Relation to lived experience. Great. You can keep popping your ideas in the chat. We'll keep rolling through because we've just got an hour together, but there's a great so far. And the reason that I asked this question is because these things, like being able to connect, having that sense of authenticity, having that sense of tangibility, being able to imagine or understand what's being said, all of those apply to writing petitions and to supporter emails as well. All these things that we think about with storytelling that might come to us instinctively about, how we present believable characters or how the pace is really clear of what we're meant to be focusing on at any one particular time in the story. All of that applies to petitions and to emails as well. And I think possibility of change, yeah, great. That's great. And I think sometimes it can feel like when we're opening up that document, trying to write our petition or our email, it feels like we need to put all the facts and demonstrate all the evidence and show that we know everything that there is to know and make sure that the person on the other end of it has all these facts that are lined up. But actually, a lot of the time, writing petitions and emails is more like writing a story than it is about writing an essay. And so, yeah, keep those elements of a good story in your mind. Cool. So the context for this is, I think it's important to ask ourselves why we even think about the way that we write. Like, why do we even think about which parts we put together and what we include and what we don't? And the reason is that our petitions and our supporter emails exist in the context of the world around us. So I think for those of us who want to see an Aotearoa that's fair, where everybody has what they need to build the life that they want, where our beautiful taiao is cared for, and where the promise of Te Tiriti is lived into, we're looking at some pretty transformational changes that are required to get us into that world that we dream of and that we work toward every day. And to be able to make changes on that level, we need heaps of people to come with us. We can't just be doing it in small groups, small and passionate groups by ourselves. Um, and then, especially right now, as across the world, bad faith actors are deliberately trying to turn people against each other and manipulate progress that is made towards inclusivity to further their own power. So, thinking about how we need to bring these large groups of people with us is an important reason. Um, Another one is that every one of us in this 2025, we're recipients of thousands of messages a day. And those screenshots on the left, as I was making the slide, I just screenshotted just a few of the ads that I was presented with while I was literally making the slide. And as I was going between checking my email, reading a news story, going on my phone. And you can see like they're all really like visually intense, go, go, go. And then that one that's got the dentures on it that was like snapping across the screen. We're recipients of thousands of messages a day. So every time we email our supporters, we're we're fighting for attention with all of these other messages that person might be getting in that day. And that's also means that we only have this really limited amount of attention span that we have with people when we're speaking with them through these mechanisms as well. Oh yeah. Oh, thanks, Patali. Related word, yes, a hero and antagonist, clear journey. All those are so, yeah, beautiful. Um, Thank you for those. So these are the reasons why it's important to think about the way that we write and the way that we present our issues. And then, as Ruby said at the start, ultimately, the tools that we choose in our campaigns are always going to depend on who we are, our place in the ecosystem of change, and what our theory of change is. And those sound like really jargony terms, but it basically just means, yeah, who we are. There are lots of us who try to make change in different ways, and we have different beliefs about how that change is made as well. So everything that I'm sharing today, just consider them to be tools in a kete that you can pick up at the right time in the right way for the right strategy, but they won't always be the right tool. And there's no one right way to do things. So what we're going to go through is these parts. The biggest parts where I'll be sharing some of what I've learned over the years will be those first three: the anatomy of an online petition, the structure that we call vision, barrier, solution, action, going over some common structures that we use in campaign email, and then we have a choose your own adventure section, which we'll come to. And then if we have time, we'll have some quick fire tips and tricks as well. So this is what to expect. So yeah, just so you know in advance, it will be a bit of me talking for the first part, and then it'll be a bit more all of us together. But as Ruby said, please put your questions in the chat as we go. So, kicking off anatomy of a petition, part one. For this section, are going to use the Protect Pay Equity petition as an example, just because this was a recent one that I worked on. This petition, as I said at the start, was grown to over 94,000 and delivered in front of Parliament. It's from the time we started it to when we handed it over. It was definitely less than 3 months. It might have been 2 months or something. I can't, it's a blur. But we're going to go through all the major elements of what a petition has and what you need to write when you're starting out your petition. So starting out with something that is really important is the title, and getting the title right will make a huge impact on how any petition ends up going, of how far it gets traveled, how far it gets shared. And the best advice that I have for this is to keep them short, clear, and values led. So when you just see that title of that petition, you should get an immediate idea of what exactly this is about and what you're calling for at an absolute glance, so people don't have to be an expert to understand what you're talking about. And a good way to do that is to try not to use acronyms or jargon in your title. When we talk about values led, it can also be really good to have something in your petition that connects with the values of why we believe in what we're doing. So when we chose Protect Pay Equity, um, I was thinking about the values of equity and equality and bringing those to the front, to help people understand that this was what it was going to be about. But I also knew that not everybody knows what pay equity is, so then ended up adding that second part, which was about the scrapping of the pay claims and the law. So that's part one, the title. Part two is the decision maker. So usually by the time you're writing your petition, you'll be quite clear on who your decision maker is. I know there's been sessions before about campaign strategy in the series, and a lot of that would have been gone over then. So usually our decision maker is identified in our campaign planning. But when we choose which decision maker to put on the petition, we should be sure that that decision maker actually has the power to create the change that we're asking for, and it should also reflect our campaign's target and our strategy. So in this case, we could have put that this petition was addressed to Prime Minister Luxon or Workplace Relations Minister Brooklyn Valdine, Finance Minister. We could have put any of those individuals, but the reality is that we knew that the government was highly unlikely to do a 180 turn on this massive thing that they had just announced out of nowhere. And we also considered, we could feel the heat of that moment of when pay equity was scrapped by this government was so strong that it was transcending normal political boundaries, and it was kind of calling into question about what a government in Aotearoa has the power to do. And so it kind of transcended it beyond those political boundaries. And that's why the decision maker that we chose for this one ended up being the House of Representatives, being everybody that's in that parliament. There were sometimes where you do choose a decision maker for your petition, even though you don't actually believe that person is going to do it, because you know that decision maker, you know that minister is not friendly to your cause or whatever it may be, and that's totally fine. It all just completely depends on what your campaign strategy is. You may need to be applying pressure to that person, and they do have the power to change it, even though you know they probably won't. So part three is the ask or the asks. And in this one, in the pay equity petition, we were asking for a reversal of all the claim cancellations that had happened, for them to undo the changes to the Equal Pay Act that they had made that did, diminish the power of that act to actually deliver pay equity for anyone, and then actually deliver settlements to the people that were waiting for them as well. So in these asks, when you're writing them, just try to be clear, precise, and tangible. And we should be able to understand exactly what you're asking for in just a few words, so literally half a sentence. And those bolded ones in this example kind of show that. Being precise really helps people believe that the petition will create change, because they can see that it's something serious, it's something that will can be changed, that they can imagine. And it should be something that's active as well rather than a passive ask. So an example of something that's passive is if we had asked the government to look into whether the changes should be reversed. That if we deliver that and then the politicians can argue that they've made that change by calling for an inquiry and then maintaining, the exact same thing that's happened, right? So it's good to make sure that we're being quite hard and active in what we're asking for. If you don't know exactly what the ask should be of your petition yet, that is totally all good. I can offer the OAS team's help to clarifying that ask. And sometimes that also means that we just need to spend a little bit more time in our planning phase of our campaign. It's totally ketipai. Um, One thing to keep in mind is usually if you will deliver your petition to Parliament, and not all petitions go to Parliament, but if you do plan to deliver it there, this part of your asks is really important because usually that ask will get transposed onto the official documentation that goes within Parliament. So that's the thing that actually gets carried on the records. That's the thing that the politicians actually have to respond to. So it's good to just keep that in mind when you're drafting your asks. So part 4 is our image. And this part is important because it just makes a difference about how people perceive what your issue is and who you are as well. So one thing that works really well is to show people in the image, show people that are behind the change, whether it's your campaign rōpū, it's your community, it's your whānau. You can show images of your community who are affected by this issue, people who will benefit from the change that you're calling for being made, or the people that are pushing for it. So in this instance, we had this lineup of absolute union women stalwarts, and they were filing the care and support workers pay equity claim in the Employment Relations Authority, like in court, basically, like months, about a year before the law change came through. And in this image is Christine Bartlett, who people might know, recognize Christine's name. She's an amazing advocate and support worker who was a really important leader in the fight for pay equity in the first round. There's also Marianne Bishop and Pasang Sherpa, and maybe Katie Rousel in there too. The reason that we chose this is that we wanted people to connect with the actual people that were behind this, and not to see pay equity as this bureaucratic process that was all about dollars and figures and that. We also want to choose an image that adds context and information to what your petition is about. So thinking of people who have no idea what your kaupapa is, they've never seen it before, and the only information that they've got to understand what you're talking about is the title of your petition and your image. So what kind of information can we give them that contextualizes what we're calling for to help ease them into understanding it a little bit better? And this is why it matters. On the left is a screenshot of what it looked like when we were halfway through building this petition. And this was a rapid response one as well. Like, I think the announcement was made at about 11 a.m. and we had our petition published by 5 p.m. that day, which, so that's not all of our petitions have to be done like that. Sometimes we get to work on them for a long time and then launch them at a strategic moment. But halfway through building this petition, we didn't have the title sorted and we didn't have the image sorted. And so when people shared it on Facebook, it looked like the image on the left. And you can kind of see there it's confusing, eh? Like you don't really know what it is. You can't even tell that it's a petition. And so if I send that to my mate, they don't know what to do with it. But then the one on the right, we can see people, we can see sign the petition and protect pay equity, we can see what it's about, and we can see what's going to happen when we click that link. So we're more likely to click it. And then the last part of this anatomy of a petition is the content. So we've talked about the title, the decision maker, our asks, our image, and then the last part that we need to complete a petition is the kind of meaty part of where we make our argument. And so this is usually where we will include the evidence of why this change is needed and where we tell the story that I was talking about before about why this change is needed as well. And there's the structure that we use a lot. We used a lot at Action Station called Vision, Barrier, Solution, Action, which I will go into. So this is using the pay equity petition as the example, where the way that we've structured the information of the argument of the petition is into the structure of vision, barrier, solution, action. So we started out by saying, when nurses, midwives, support workers and teachers are valued, our communities are healthier and more connected. That's the reason that we want to have pay equity enacted. That's the vision that we're working towards, only part of that vision. Then the barrier, the national-led government has gutted the Equal Pay Act, and they've done that by cancelling the claims, putting up barriers to raising new ones, and withdrawing maintenance of existing claims. This one, our solution was quite strange because the solution had already existed to some degree, that they had actually taken the solution away. So we're talking about how since that this pay equity law came into reality, over 150,000 people had had their lives transformed by getting settlements, which basically meant that people like social workers or school administrators, teacher aides, nurses, people like that had had pay increases that reflected the fact that they were getting undervalued because it was mostly women that were doing that work. And then we had the action. That's why we're calling on the government to reverse the changes and deliver pay equity. So that's just to show you an example, and we'll go into each of those elements a little bit more. But first, I just wanted to ask this question of why? Like, why does the structure work, and why do we recommend the structure for people doing this type of campaigning? And the first reason is about how our brains process information. So this image that's on this slide is from an organization called The Workshop, and it demonstrates what cognitive linguistics and behavioral sciences tell us about what happens for us when we receive new information. So I think there's this idea out there that every human is a rational actor, that we're wandering around making really logical decisions and making sure we have access to all the right information before we make the best decision with the information at hand. And that idea is prolific for a lot of reasons. And I think a lot of us knowingly or unknowingly believe that that's true, or even if we don't believe that that's fully true, sometimes we act in our campaigns as if it is. If only people had the right information, then they just behave differently or support this campaign. And sometimes that looks a little bit like, I don't think we don't usually do this on purpose, but sometimes we accidentally treat people as if they're empty vessels that we just need to fill with the right, if they just get our passion and our information dumped into their brains, then they'll be on board with us. But actually, we're all complicated human beings who are walking through this world, who have experience of the world and stories to make sense of it. And yeah, our campaign information is kind of existing in that reality for people. So in terms of this chain that the workshop teaches us about, is that they tell us that information gets processed in a chain. And the first thing when we receive a bit of new information that they tell us is that it gets filtered through our existing beliefs and our values. So there's this really quick subconscious process when we get this new bit of information where we go, oh, does this actually fit with my values and what I already believe in? And it's a very fast process in a split second, which then can set off this nervous system signal, which usually what it looks like is that we have a feeling. So when we're presented with new information and it gets kind of filtered through what we already think, we can notice ourselves having an emotional reaction, even a small one. And it might be that it makes us feel angry or outraged. Sometimes a piece of new information could make us feel soothed or relieved. Sometimes it just makes us feel bored. And so basically what it's saying is that it goes through our existing values and beliefs about the world, and then you have this nervous system response. And then actually the last thing that comes at play is logic. And what we end up doing is using the logic that we have to justify the reaction we've had that's based off our feelings. And so it's not even necessarily looking for like neutral logic. As our brains look for logic that justifies the reaction that we've already had. And this all happens very quickly. And it's only after those three things have happened that we actually make a decision about how we might respond to a piece of information. So whether we ignore it, reject it, or even sometimes that new information can push us further into the belief that we already hold. And yeah, and I guess the reason I talk about this is that because we know that this is how information processing works, we can use that. We can use the structures like vision, barrier, solution, action to recognize that this is how it often works for people. And yeah, I thought I'd just ask Ruby, is there anything you want to add on that? Because it's a lot.
I think you have nailed it. I think just wanted to reiterate, like, it seems really illogical that this is how our brains work, but actually it's a gift, because if we were using our critical brains or our slow thinking brains all the time to get through the world would be like, oh, there's something in my cup. What is it? Oh, it looks liquid. Maybe I want something, like it would actually be this really slow process. Or we'd be like crossing a road and all of a sudden a car would come out of nowhere and we would go, oh, moving vehicle very fast before jumping out of the way, as
Mm.
opposed to like this fast thinking brain is what allows us to be like recognize a fast object hurtling towards us and be gone from that space and jump away really quickly. So like it has like there's like a really useful biological reason why we have this fast thinking brain. It's just the problem we have in today's world is because we're so overloaded by all those ads and bits of information that Madeline talked about in the beginning. We're like constantly kind of in fast thinking brain because we're constantly being overloaded. Like we're kind of on hyperdrive the whole time, which means that it's especially hard for when we're presenting new or different points of view that we need people to understand in order for them to understand why supporting our cope-up or our solution is the right thing to do. We're up against this kind of like hyper jumble of information that's already going and a lot of marketing. And the reason why these like intrinsic values is why values are so important is we know everyone has lots of different values all within them competing at the same time. So someone might really value everyone having enough to live good lives, but at the same time, they might be really worried about, am I going to get that promotion at work? Like that kind of like power versus universalism. So, and because lots of advertising uses extrinsic values, like values about power, money, social order, security, like these really externally expressed values, we have to work extra hard to bring people into those like internally driven values about like love and solidarity and universalism, like wanting good things for everyone. So we've got to explicitly say something that primes those values to the surface. So then people are a little bit more likely to receive the rest of our message. So it's about kind of like it's priming basically. And it's so important in today's world because we're constantly being primed by values that might lead us to unhelpful solutions.
Kia ora. Thanks, Ruby. And I'll just say as well, like the reason that I just called on part of the reason also because Ruby's super knowledgeable in all of this as well. But like I'm not a behavioral scientist. I'm not a cognitive linguist. Um, and yeah, this stuff is all like built in that, but I am still growing my knowledge about these processes. And so I just say that because like if there's like a teaspoon of this that makes sense, that is like, oh, is that why this message hasn't been landing? If there's just a small amount that's kind of locking in and making sense, that's awesome. And it doesn't have to all come at once because there's so many layers to this practice. Yeah. Oh yeah, Ruby.
One, I did a mental health training recently, actually, and they have a way of talking about this, which I found quite helpful. So they talk about your values and beliefs are your frame, like the
Mm.
frame which you see the world. So it's like we can only really see what's in within that frame. And then your emotions or the other shortcuts kind of talks about previous experiences with a similar thing. Those are your lenses. So like the frame, so yeah, the values and beliefs is like the whole picture that you can see, and then the emotions or the for other experiences are the lenses which you're looking through that today. So our job is to like, yeah, I found it quite like a nice metaphor for this. And I love that mental health um, professionals are using the same brain logic process as what we use in this because it lets me know we're on the right page and we're all following the right science.
Yeah, that. Cool. And yeah, if there are any questions or anything, please feel free to pop them in the chat, even if it's like um, I'm not quite sure this, yeah, anything in the chat is very welcome. So part two of why we use this structure, that's been really helpful. Oh, awesome. Thank you. Kia ora. The part two is this tool that we use called the Spectrum of Allies. This might have come up if people have been on previous trainings with this Skillshare series, but if you haven't, also okay to buy. When it basically tells us when we're writing anything for a campaign or for anything, we need to think about who our audience is. So And that's quite logical way because the way that I talk about pay equity with my auntie is different to how I talk about it with my boss. We're having like different kinds of conversations and we're framing things in different ways. It's just the same as that. And so the spectrum of allies tools, it helps us to break down who we're actually talking to so that we can frame our message effectively. And we can map our audiences along the spectrum. So you can see that it's split into 5 parts. We've got our active allies over on the left. And so these are our people who are our ride or dies, like they're with us all the way. If we share something from our Instagram account, they're the ones that are always in there sharing it. If we host an event, we can rely on them to turn up every time. And then we have our passive allies who are the people where if they got polled today, if a polling company called them and said, hey, do you believe that pay equity should be restored? They'd be like, yep. But they haven't come to a rally, for example. So they believe in they support what we're doing, but they haven't taken action. Neutral is people that could go either way. And usually, when we think about these people in the neutral zone, it's not that they don't have any opinions at all. Usually, it means that they could go either way, and they're often influenced by the most recent person that they talk to about that matter. Um, and then passive opposition is kind of the opposite of passive ally. It's if they got polled and they said, "Do you think that we should restore pay equity?" They would say no, but they're not the ones who are in the active opposition who might be emailing ACT MPs, for example, being like, we love your work, please keep going. Or like that, commenting on Facebook saying, yeah, nah, pay equity's trash or whatever. Yeah, so they oppose our view, but they're not being active about it. And then our active opposition are the people who are complete opposite interests to us. The good thing, the great news is we don't actually need every single person in Aotearoa to agree with us to win our campaign. Most campaigns only need to bring a certain number of people across just one segment to the left from where they started, and the left being on the spectrum that I'm showing you now. So we just need to bring a certain number of people who are currently neutral into passively supporting, and we need to bring a certain number of people who are passive allies into being active allies. Um, and one of the best things about this tool is that it helps us remember that we don't need to position our whole campaign, what we say, what we write, how we act around our active opposition, because sometimes it can be really easy to believe that when we see our active opposition out there saying all this stuff that isn't helpful, that they're saying things like pay equity is really expensive and it's unaffordable, or there'll be things for all our different kaupapa where you'll be able to imagine who I'm talking about right now. And sometimes we feel like we need to pitch our argument against what they're saying. So if they're saying pay equity is unaffordable, if I'm thinking about the active opposition and how I might frame my message to them, I might feel like I need to say, oh, it's really expensive, but it's a worthwhile investment and it pays off in the long term. Um, and we end up warping ourselves, basically. We end up like twisting ourselves in all these different like weird directions to try to appeal to these 15% of people. That the best news ever, we don't need them. We don't need to bring we have the numbers without that 15% actually coming with us, and they're not our people. They generally do have literally opposing political interests to where we have. So that helps us focus more on our active allies and those people in the middle and shifting that one section over. The other thing about this tool is that it shows that the job of a good message is to travel. Because even if we're the most resourced organization or campaign in the world, we've got big bucks for advertising, we're still never going to reach the exact number of people that we need directly to come with us for our campaign to then win our goal. So basically, to make sure that our message travels, we need it to be repeated, and we need people to be repeating it in their everyday conversations and feeling comfortable and feeling like, yep, this makes sense to me. And there's this phrase that comes from this messaging expert called Osorio, where she says our job is to energize our base, persuade our middle, and alienate our opposition. So when we say energize the base, we're thinking about our active allies, and what our message needs to do is to make them be like, yeah, like that is what I believe, and I feel hope, and I feel like it's so true, and I feel like this is part of myself that I'm supporting this kaupapa today. And many of us can probably relate to having that feeling at certain times when we feel activated, and then they're going to go out and talk to their communities because they're going to have those connections with our passive allies, our neutral people, and even our passive opposition. They're the ones who are most likely who are going to bring those people over, one, to welcome them to come be a volunteer, to come to an event, even just to talk to their uncle at Christmas, to stop that passive opposition, go from passive opposition to neutral. And if they are spreading a message that is persuasive, then we can persuade that middle to come over one. And then alienating the opposition. When we talk about opposition, I am talking about that 15% of the active opposition. Sometimes when people hear that, they feel excited. Sometimes when people hear that, they feel uncomfortable. Whatever it makes you feel, it's totally okay. But the reason that that's important is because when we see that our opposition is alienated by our message, that shows us that we're actually saying something. Because if we recognize that those interests aren't, we have different interests, and then our message is so bland, like we're saying like something like, you know, equality is good, and then nobody's upset, then we're probably not being direct enough in what we're saying, and we're not going to get anywhere. So alienating the opposition can be a symbol that you're actually on the right track with your campaign. Cool. So those were two of the reasons why we use the structure. And now I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into each of these segments. And I'm going to try to go over it pretty quick because yeah, I want to be able to have time for a discussion if people are up for it. But the first part is vision. So just revisiting the pay equity petition that we had there, some of the ingredients that make a good vision are, yeah, the same ones that were in our story, that it's imaginable, that it uses those intrinsic values that Ruby was talking about, that we have intentional framing that Ruby also talked about. And then we have this idea of selling the cake and not the ingredients. And this is referencing, those like, if you need you're not a baker, but you need to bake a cake for your mum's birthday, and you go into the baking aisle and there are those like packet baking mixes. And on the front of the box is the most beautiful chocolate gâteau that you've ever seen. It's got icing in it and all of that. You bring it home, you open the box. What's in it? It's a bag of powder. It's cocoa, it's flour, it's baking soda, it's baking powder. Not much of a baker. And it does. Yeah, there's no cake directly in the box. But if those companies put those packets of powder on the front of their boxes, they would not be selling any of them, And that's a reason. There's a reason why they do that. So for this situation with pay equity, an example of if we'd gone out there and just said pay equity is important, that's true. We believe that. But pay equity is an ingredient that is required to get to this vision that we want to see for Aotearoa. And just, yeah, another example of that intentional framing is that we could have led with pay equity is really expensive, but it's a worthwhile investment. And that just would have made people think about wealth, about scarcity, about finite resources. And so instead, we were trying to get people to think about the things that most of us do value, which is these people that do make our communities healthier and connected. So then we're revisiting our barrier. And the aspects of the barrier that we like to include is naming our agents. So in this example, we said the national led government because that's who did it. If we don't include the agent, then people find it really hard to understand that people made the decision, and therefore people can make a different decision to change that condition. So it's always important to include the person, the power, the whoever it is that is responsible for this, putting up this barrier, to include that as part of the story. And so again, we've got facts in here that the changes entrench gender-based pay discrimination, but we didn't lead with our facts right at the top. They become part of the story, so there's context for them when we hear them. And we also explain the chain of events that led to that barrier as well. This is really important for our barriers because one thing that, and Casey would say this as well, we hear from our support workers all the time in the PSA is that when they're having conversations with their communities, they get this question, oh, but why don't you just get a different job? And that's sucks because like we need our support. They're some of the most like fundamental people that hold our whānau and like our society together. And loads of our support workers like are really good at support work and they want to be doing that mahi. But it's an example of how the barriers get individualized for people. Like that individual support worker will get blamed for not getting paid enough for choosing the wrong profession, when actually the real reason is that profession is undervalued. So we need to explain the chain of events to help people like see beyond the individual stuff that's in front of them. Solution. So some of the conditions that we include in a solution is what is the change that is needed to overcome the barrier, who can make that change, and how does it step us toward that vision. So in our solution here was that these pay equity was a process that was working. Draw people's gaze upstream. That's a great question. Thank you, Wiramu. So that is uh, also kind of related to the individualizing the problem thing, because our brains are good at understanding the individual circumstances that are playing out in front of us, but they're not really designed to understand these massive superstructures and these like institutional things that have been put in place over many, many years. Um, and like, of course, we're like capable of it, but just in the day to day of life, and the kind of um, message overload and these other conditions that we've talked about, it's harder to see the whole system at play, and that can lead to if you don't understand the upstream decisions that cause the downstream consequences for people, then you might end up blaming an individual for the circumstances that they are in, e.g. the support worker example. So the pushing the gaze upstream is helping to people just lift their gaze toward the horizon. Another example would be that you know, if you're standing in a river where the you're noticing that it's polluted, and like the fish, there's fewer fish in it than there has been, you might be like, oh, well, why didn't this person who lives by the river take better care of the river to make sure that these fish were cared for? But then literally, if you look upstream, there's a factory down the way that's actually pumping all this pollution down. So that's the kind of what we mean when we talk about that. Um, Cool. So the solution, kia ora, helping us towards the vision, and then our action. So that's why we're calling on the government to reverse these changes and deliver full pay equity. So how does your petition actually call for the solution to be done? So our solution was the pay, having a decent pay equity scheme, and the action that we're calling for is the government to, again, an agent, to reverse the changes, deliver pay equity. And one thing I think is really important is making sure that our vision, barrier, solution, and action credibly stack up together. Because if you're not convinced by that argument, you personally, nobody else will be. And I'll give you an example of that where I could make a vision, barrier, solution, action where I said most of us want to have a flourishing taiao for our children to enjoy, but right now greenhouse gas emissions are still rising despite the Paris Agreement. The solution, Aotearoa needs to reduce our emissions, and then the action, everybody in Aotearoa needs to recycle. And if I say that, you're like, yep, it follows yeah, I just don't think that recycling is quite going to get us there. And I think that kind of applying that scrutiny to our own argument that we're making can be really helpful and can strengthen us. Um, it is now 12:50. And I had some stuff in here about emails, but I actually just want to skip us through to choose your own adventure. Um, and I was going to ask everybody if you'd like to use the remaining time to just have a yarn together. It could be partai, but it could just be reflections. It could be, what it's brought up for you, or to have some solo writing time to have this opportunity to have a go. Um, yeah, which would people like to do? And you can do an emoji reaction, I think, or put it in the chat. Oh, here the stuff I skipped through. Yeah, okay, that's an option. What about everybody else? Okay, all right. We'll do that. I interestingly, okay, cool. Next team. All right. So how does this relate to emails? I want to hear more about you. Oh, we want to go now. Okay, it's all right. The common types of campaign email. Um, there are lots of different types, but most of them fall into three categories: persuasion, call to action, or narrative shift, or political education. So the first one, types of email. The first one that we usually would send as a campaign is one that's aiming to convince people to support a particular kaupapa. So if we're launching a campaign for the first time, we might be sending out an email that's trying to persuade people to support the position, or it could be trying to get people to, kia ora, thanks, Norm. It could be people getting to shift a position. So for example, if you're trying to get people to vote yes in the Māori wards referendum, for example, you might use a persuasion email. This is a great place to re-employ your vision, barrier, solution, action. And this is an example from a really long time ago. I don't know, this was just one that I found from when I was working at Action Station, when they were trying to close the Children's Commission and reduce the independent powers that that commission had. And so we started with this vision, motivated by making Aotearoa a great place for tamariki. For that to happen, we need adults in power to have, to be able to be advocates for children. The government's proposing a law that would take their powers away. We want them to keep their powers, sign the petition. You can see how that makes a compelling argument in a way where it just leads you through um, without stressing you out, even though you might not have even heard of the Children's Commission before. But yeah, so in persuasive emails, it can be really great to just start with your vision, barrier, solution, action, and then call for the people to take the action that is supporting your campaign. The second type is a call to action. The reasons that we usually will use these is we're trying to get people to deepen their commitment or to take it. Maybe they've signed the petition already and we want them to email the minister. Perhaps we're fundraising to be able to send a certain part of our campaign group up to Wellington to do something. So we're trying to get them to donate. It could be many different things that you're asking of your supporters. But the thing is, when we're sending these emails, we usually know that they agree with our solution. Like we're already on the same page that that pay equity needs to be kept. But right now, I'm trying to convince people that coming to an action on September 20 for the Women's Day of Action is actually going to make a difference. So the structure that we recommend for this type of email is different. We wouldn't use a vision, barrier, solution, action. We would usually try to include answers to the questions why this, why now, why me, and why us, all very upfront so that person can get answers to all those questions so that they have the personal belief and the action is actually going to be worth their time, that it will make a difference. And so in this example, there are better, this one's a bit messy, but it's fine. The why this is, there's only 4 days left till the Women's Day of Action. People are rising up in 20 places across Aotearoa. This is your invitation to be part of it. The why now is sort of this part down here of our movement has built and sustained pressure on the government, and our actions have been working. People keep describing this issue as the issue that just won't go away, but we actually need to keep that pressure on. So that's why now. Why me is up here. The PSA has a proud history of standing up for pay equity, and sorry, the way me is as a union member, you have a special place at the heart of this moment, especially those of us who have been part of pay equity claims. And then the way us is this collective that we are together, which is the union. The members are the union, and we have together this history of standing up for pay equity. So if you're contacting your supporters to get them to take an action, just try to make sure, even in your first paragraph, before you even have the link to the RSVP or what have you, that you've answered those questions of why this, why now, why me, and why us. The third type of emails that we'd usually send in a campaign are narrative shift or political education. The reason that we use these is because we're noticing that perhaps a lot of people are talking in a way that is quite destructive to our purposes. Something happens in the news cycle that really confuses people, and people get left being like, oh, I'm not actually really sure what to think about that. Um, or yeah, so these ones often help people make sense of a moment, or they help them land to a place of clarity, to see the gray area, or to see, people might be saying this, but it's not necessarily coming from the best place, these kind of gray area things. We also use them to increase members' understanding of an issue. So if we're trying to get them more comfortable understanding what even pay equity is to be able to talk about it, we might use a political education type email. And these emails, the ask is what we call a soft ask. So you wouldn't use a narrative shift email to try to grow your petition or to try to fundraise, because usually your ask will get lost amongst the beautiful detail that you're trying to get to, and these more kind of complex ones. And the example that I've included here, I haven't written one of these in a while, but it just made me think of this beautiful one by Rangimarie Sophie Jolly, who works at Action Station. She wrote this narrative shifty political education email about the changes to NCEA. And for me, I didn't know what to think about. I knew what I kind of thought when that was announced, but that's not my ballpark. Like, I don't know anything about education issues. So when Rangimarie from Action Station sent this beautiful email that had this clarity but nuance in it, this helped me land on what I believed. And yeah, so that's just an example of a really great one. Yeah, so those were the things that I skipped over. Um, the last couple of things that I was going to say were some closing thoughts and some acknowledgements. And perhaps once I've done those, if there are any reflections or partai, we can go into those. But this is concluding thoughts is give it a go. Be yourself. We had sorry, I can't remember who it was, but somebody said authenticity at the start. That is so important. If using these is making you feel like you're doing that warping, then take that seriously. Like then yeah, give it a go and be yourself. They're not rules that you have to tick every single box and get it perfectly right. And ultimately you know your community and the kaupapa that you're working on as well. So just believe in what you know, use the tools when they can help you, but don't let them feel restrictive. Um, some acknowledgements of the people that taught me that so I know anything about these matters include the people from the workshop, including Jess Brensonshaw and Marianne Elliott. There's this organisation called Common Cause, Anachinko Osorio I mentioned, and Te Raukura O'Connell Rapira is one of my teachers that I've been blessed with in my life to learn from about many things, including this type of work.